first 1.5-story original home may have been built by Captain James Taylor III sometime between 1729, when his father died, and maybe as late as 1750. James III appears to have left Bloomsbury to his son, Colonel James Taylor IV. And reading through different diaries and notes, it looks as if James IV moved out, but didn't sell it. And his son, Hubbard Taylor, moved into the house. But Hubbard is not showing up on any of the maps of who is on what land and where in Orange County. Hubbard tells Francis Taylor that he had sold Bloomsbury to William Taylor, a merchant, for £1,000. However, the deed that actually happened shows that it happened on February 26th, 1790, but it was James IV who sold it to William Taylor of Fredericksburg. It's really convoluted. You look at it, and the names in Francis Taylor's diary and the different deeds, there are so many names. It gives you a nightmare just trying to unravel it all. Unfortunately, that is falling on someone else's shoulders, and I don't have to do that. Where was I? Okay. William Taylor then sells the property to Elias Langham in 1791. Elias doesn't do anything to the house and eventually sells Bloomsbury to a William Quarles in 1797. And we do believe it was William Quarles that added the lean-tos and the second edition here sometime between 1797 and maybe as late as maybe 1810. We're not positive just yet. In 1842, Bloomsbury was sold at auction on July 15th and was purchased by Francis Jerdone for around $15,000. The home sat on 1,423 acres at that time. Today it's on 355. The Jerdones lived here for about 122 years. And then Eleanor Jerdone Davis sold the property to Jacqueline Erasmus Taylor in 1964. This returned Bloomsbury back into the Taylor family. Now, he and his wife, Helen Marie, they were newlyweds, worked on the house in the 1960s, and around 1968, Jacqueline deeded it over to Helen Marie. And just for laughs and giggles, we all do a lot of genealogical research. Well, Helen Marie is related back, and I don't know how many greats it is, to the half-brother of Colonel James Taylor II. Jacqueline Erasmus, her husband, goes back to Colonel Taylor II. So they're like ninth cousins, something like that. So Helen Marie, unfortunately, died in 2022. She had spent over 50 years, just about 54 years, collecting 18th century up into the mid-19th century furnishings for the house. And this place is filled with some really interesting pieces. Now, Helen Marie and her husband, Jacqueline, were part of the founding group that founded our museum. They worked with the, Orange County and Virginia Bicentennial Commissions and other local people. But they did purchase the land and donated it for Taylor Park. They bought the building that the museum is housed in. So Mrs. Taylor wanted the museum to have some sort of steady income to help keep the doors open into the future. So her estate has done a memorandum of understanding with the museum. You know, I shouldn't have these on when I'm not reading. Oh my gosh, I can see you. And the memorandum of understanding gives the museum exclusive rights to using the property for tours, for events, whatever we want to use it for to raise money for the museum. The Helen Marie Taylor Charitable Foundation owns the property. They formed the Bloomsbury Manor LLC that takes care of paying for all of the upkeep and the soon-to-be happening repairs and various explorations to be done of the architecture. So that's where we are today. Two people that worked for Mrs. Taylor for a long time, Rufus and Bonnie, they are still working for the trust. Mrs. Taylor's rental properties, they have been repairing and selling to benefit the trust. They are now working on Berry Hill. I don't know if that will remain in the trust or if it will be sold. We don't really know what the plans yet. That's kind of changing week to week, depending. All right, at this point in time, this house never will be open to the public. It would ruin the structure of the home to add handicap accessible features to it. So tours are only available privately, prepaid, in case people don't show up. And that way we're taken care of. Now, we know we're not going to be as popular as Montpelier, Mount Vernon, Ferry Farm, Kenmore. We're not a presidential site. We did have some interesting and historical things happen here, primarily Robert E. Lee, his camp within a mile of the house on Bloomsbury land, the winter of 1863 and 4. Okay. And Jefferson Davis, the president of the Confederacy, stayed upstairs in the master chamber in the Taylor wing of the house for about 4 or 5 days. So we are planning to annex the campsite and make a walking trail so that those that are Civil War enthusiasts can enjoy walking up, seeing the site, which I believe has a bronze plaque and maybe remnants of the base that held his tent. But I'm sure relic hunters have had a great time back there, so there's probably not much else to see. So those are the kind of the important things that happened here. Because this is not a house that is important because of who lived here, what is interesting about this house and what we think will draw people is its architecture, the potential archaeological findings, and the stories that we hope to uncover. I know some of you have had an opportunity to look at the one information panel we have so far, and what that shows you is a drone view of the property, where they believe 2 enslaved quarters were, possibly a kitchen right over here, an orangery, a bathhouse. There may have been a schoolroom, lots of different outbuildings or dependencies, if you were. Fortunately, none of this land has been cultivated. So all of these foundations and pieces are just right under the dirt, waiting to be found. So that's kind of exciting to me. A brief history of the property is shared on what we think we know about all of those buildings on that panel. In addition to all of those other things, we are wanting to share information about the enslaved who lived and worked here. And to this end, Ms. Zan Nelson of Write the Record has done months of research in naming the enslaved of Bloomsbury, and you have an abbreviated copy of her findings that was handed out. Now, before the Knights of the Golden Horseshoe and the Taylors built in this area, there were indigenous people that lived on this land, and I have had the pleasure of meeting with both Ann Miller and Ray Ezell, talking about collaborations on getting various histories and findings and things so we can give more information to guests and eventually collecting all of this into a book about Bloomsbury. It won't be a very big one, but it'll still be a book. So what about the structure itself that you see behind me? The first question is, how old are the 2 wings of the structure? If the original boundaries were entered correctly, and if the early maps are accurate, then there's a probability that the first 1.5-story home was built between 1729 and 1740. If those same parameters were not correct, there is a slight possibility that maybe Mrs. Taylor was right and it was 1722. It all comes down to dendrochronology. We will have, like I said, a better idea of the construction. The dendrochronology will be done October 3rd. Until then, it's all supposition. And hopefully, once we get these questions answered, there will not be a whole ballywick of a lot more unanswered questions, hopefully just a manageable few. I'm not certain of the timelines, but future efforts will include archaeological work to find and uncover all the foundations of the outbuildings, and hopefully match their existence to different owners. A professional colonial gardens expert will be sought to research and develop a period-appropriate garden. What you see behind you, the terracing that leads down into the long green space. There are records of plantings in there around a bowling green. Now, Roy Carpenter, does anybody know who Roy is? Well, his grandpa, now Roy's got to be in his 80s, close to 90. His grandfather was the last known tenant farmer on Bloomsbury. And Roy said he used to play down in that garden area, and it was a flat green with this really scraggly, nasty-looking, untended half-moon circle type of half-circle garden of flowers, and lots of American boxwoods all around it. And so that's the only live testimony we have as to what was down there. The horseshoe is not quite the same as a half circle. I guess that the horseshoe garden idea would be a testimony toward Colonel James Taylor and the Knights of the Golden Horseshoe. So we'll see if that's a possibility. The more documents that are read, more of Francis Taylor's diary, as well as Colonel James IV. Jan Pfeiffer has James IV, a copy of the James IV diaries, as well as the originals. And he actually dictated more of his memoirs to his daughter. So I've got bits and pieces, but I've not been able to read the whole thing yet, so that'll be interesting. One of my favorite quotes about Bloomsbury come from Ann Miller's book, Antebellum Orange. And she pointed out, though this is not large by modern standards, it's perfectly proportioned and appointed. And I agree, it really is. We are at the beginning of a real adventure in Orange County. And I know it's going to take a number of years, and God give me patience, and I want it right now. But we have the opportunity of creating something really special here in Orange County. We're going to take it slow. We're going to take the steps as they come, because we really want this property to unfold, to tell its own story. We don't want to start with a goal in mind and, okay, we want to go prove this, so we're going to do this. We really want Bloomsbury to reveal itself as we uncover it layer by layer. And that's all I have for you. Sorry. Oh, just for fun, this is my Bloomsbury Bible. Everything I've been learning and all of the documents I found, everything is all in here. I haven't memorized it, which is why I need notes when I talk about it. So you are welcome to meander through the house if you'd like. I can't take a tour of more than 12 people at a time because the house is just not accommodating to that. What makes Bloomsbury historically significant is its woodwork. That is what makes this place architecturally a treasure. Among the treasures in the room is the Dunlop painting of James Madison. It was done not at a live sitting, but from Dunlop's memory. And Mrs. Taylor's pride and joy in this room was the double violin case. They're very, very rare. And as you go up the stairs to the Minstrel's Gallery, when you get safely on the gallery, look into that corner and you will see the cubby where the double violin cases would be stored. We have two closets that form the base of the Minstrel's Gallery. This closet, we're not sure what was stored in here. You'll notice this has a corner fireplace. The dining room shares the flue, and then upstairs, the master chamber, that's where Jefferson Davis stayed. That is the only room upstairs with a fireplace for heating source. They all share the same flue system. I can't take a tour of more than 12 people at a time because the house is just not accommodating to that, especially going up the old staircases. I do need to warn you, the staircase going up this side, it's typical 1700s. It is steep and it is narrow. And if you have a chance, peek into that door and you will see something that has not been seen in any other colonial Virginia home. It's called a ladder stair. And it looks like a ladder that was laid down for a stair, which is kind of interesting. Now, behind me, under the original house, the first cellar is the general kitchen cellar, where food would be kept and things that you needed immediately. Behind that is the locked cellar. That is where all the spirits were kept. That is where the sugar, spices, anything you wanted to keep close tabs on was locked up there. And you can see, this is a great shot of these windows. They're all pegged in. I love this door. Under the 1797-ish wing, that is the summer kitchen. And someone, when you look at it closely down there, someone definitely reduced the size of the actual hearth area. It started out to be a massive early America fireplace where they did all their cooking. Now, anyone who was working on this plantation, whether they were indentured or enslaved, under the Taylor years, right where that little tree is, there's kind of a rectangular indentation. Guesstimates are that was the original Taylor kitchen. So if you were cooking for the Taylors, you'd bring the food here, walk up these stairs, and go into the dining room. Under the William Quarles and Jourdain ownership, the kitchen is under here. So you'd have to come out, go under the portico, come up these steps, come around, then go up the steps, and whatever room was the dining room at that time you'd use. So whoever was serving the spirits in the dining room would stand in the middle, and they could rotate, just like a lazy Susan, the liqueurs toward whatever direction. There was a great room and a dining room downstairs, the minstrel's gallery, and then the 3 bedchambers. In the younger wing of the house, you go into a passage room, these double doors up on the side here. It was because you passed through that room to go to other rooms. And on the right, Mrs. Taylor had set up like a gentleman's area, you know, pipes and games and things like that, lots of masculine bits and pieces. Over here in the main large chamber on the main room, she had that set up as a dining room, but we already had a dining room in the Taylor side, so I took liberties and I made it like a ladies' withdrawing area. Now, either side of this room are 2 lean-tos that they could have been storage. One on the far side they thought might have been a child's chamber when they had multiple families living here, but in all honesty, we really don't know. They would have used it how they wanted. Now, when you go up these stairs, there's one large bedchamber right here. Then there's an absolutely delightful infant child's chamber in the hall. There will be a 180-page report coming to us from Graham Worsham, telling us what needs to be repaired, what needs to be replaced, how it should be done. Now, I can tell you right now, the worst part of the house is the far side of this upper bedchamber on the younger wing. Obviously, there was water damage, and they fixed the leak, but they didn't fix the rotted wood, so there's lots of damage to be repaired there. So I think that gives you a pretty good overview of how you can walk through the house and what you're going to see. But I will be happy to answer questions about the house. Yes, ma'am.
I know you probably said this, but when was the last time, year-wise, that someone actually lived in the house?
That would have been Helen Marie and Jack Taylor. Jack bought it in 1964. I know that their primary home was, I just went blank.
Meadow Farm.
Thank you, Meadow Farm. That's where Mrs. Taylor and Jack and family members are interred in the backyard in the cemetery. They lived here, but not permanently, but they lived here enough that they put bathrooms in. And there's a doorway between the gentleman's study and the original part of the house. That was put in the 1960s by Jack and Helen Marie because the only way to access each side of the house was outside. And no matter what portico you look out of, you have a beautiful view of this property. It's really lovely. I would say they probably moved out somewhere around 1968 permanently. I know that Howland Taylor had mentioned, playing in the yard out here at times when they were in here working. If you get a chance to visit the museum, I have a series of photographs of how the house looked in the 1920s, how it looked when Jack and Helen Marie started working on it, and a couple photos of them working together. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Is there anything you can tell us about the 2 cemeteries that are located on the property?
A little bit. There's a cemetery over to the far corner of the garden. That was the Jourdain family cemetery. I've never had a chance to go in and read it yet. My understanding is somebody famous died here and they put a large tombstone. Do you know who it was?
I do not.
I don't know either. The Taylor Quarles Cemetery is the bricked-in, and I'm ashamed to say that it has not been cleaned up in a while. Originally, there were tomb markers for, I believe, James III and his 2 wives against the closest wall of the cemetery, because that was where the earlier tombs were. Unfortunately, they were vandalized, destroyed, stolen, and hopefully we'll be able to get them remade. The rest of it is the Quarles family. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
Bethany, did part of this house burn?
There was a fire that started up in the garret. That's why you'll see some unusual looking wood and repair job done. And the funny thing is, the first thing they took out of the house from the great room was the box grand piano.
Yeah.
And that was taken care of by the Camper family, and it never came home. And Mr. Camper has loaned that piano to the museum, so you can see it at the museum. But the fire did not spread outside a little part of the garret. They were probably using the garret as a sleeping space when they had an overcrowded house, and especially in the winter when it was really cold. Yes, sir, in the blue shirt.
Do you know what the largest point in acreage this estate was?
1,423, is that what I said? Yeah, it was 1,420 something. That was the largest. It was not a huge estate like Montpelier.
Was it Taylor? What was the name?
It was the Taylors, and it was purchased intact by the Giordons. And then I'm sure, for the regional airport, I think that was right at eminent domain for that and Booster Park or whatever. Mrs. Taylor sold the other land for the 911 center. I do not know what other owners did prior to that.
Do you know the first date reference to that grant was 1720?
The grant itself was Colonel James Taylor's grant. It was one of his perks of having been a Knight of the Golden Horseshoe group. It was for, 2 parcels totaling 15,000 acres. 8,500 of those acres would take you from the town of Orange to the Rapidan River. The land grant is actually in Orange County Courthouse, I believe. No, it's in Spotsy Courthouse, I'm sorry. But it gives him the 8,500 acres in this area. Now, Mrs. Taylor swore her own oath that this house was built in 1722, the year that he got his land grant. The problem I found is that other people found, and I read about, Ulysses Joyner, I believe, did an overlay of maps. And it shows that the cemetery actually sits on what was called, the Tolliver tract called Sylvania.
Yeah.
And that's probably 25 yards or so from where the angled boundary is for Colonel Taylor's land. We read that his son, Captain James Taylor III, purchased this from John Tolliver, who was Robert Tolliver's son, and this house would, if that map is correct, sits very much so in the Tolliver tract.
Bethany?
Yes, sir.
Was it a grant or a patent?
His was a grant. This was not a patent. At least from the notes that I've had that I've been able to read. It was an actual deed.
Well, yeah, that would happen. I mean, I'm pretty sure it's a patent.
I defer to you, Frank, because you know a lot more than I
No,
do.
well, let me preach a minute.
Please do.
Well, no, this is something we should know because we live here. There were several different ways that you could acquire land. Head rights, for example, and we can talk about that later. But a lot of people say so-and-so got a grant, and that isn't what they really got. Normally, the way land was developed around here, and the tract of 8,500 acres, I think, is shown in Pete Joyner's book
It is a patent.
as Orange County Land Patents. And the way you got a patent,
1722.
1722, you went down to the capital, I guess it'd be Williamsburg at that point, and you got yourself a warrant, which meant that no one else could apply for a patent until your warrant expired. You would get a surveyor, and Colonel Taylor happened to be a county surveyor. That's how he knew about this land. You get a surveyor and you survey the land off, and you apply to receive a patent. You can apply to either the governor, who's the representative of the crown, but if your politics are not quite right, you can apply to the crown directly. But you are awarded a patent, and a patent gives you a limited period of time within to do what is called seat and plant your patent.
4 years.
Yep, well, yeah, it varied, but yeah, that's about right. Seating meant that you had to create a place of business where you operated the patent. That was your business office. Planting the patent meant you had to develop a sufficient amount of that land to satisfy whatever legal requirements were required at that time. Building fences, building buildings, clearing land, planting land, and at the end of the patent period, there would be an appraisal, an assessment of what you had done. And if you had done enough to earn the patent, if you had, according to the inspectors, you had done enough, you would then get title to the land. You didn't have it titled until then. Now, you were allowed to use local land laws, trespass, and that sort of stuff, to keep people off the land while you're developing, seeding, and planting the patent. But the land was not yours until it had passed inspection. And patents around here did what they call lapse. People would buy people would be awarded a patent, fail to seed and plant, and the patent would lapse, and the land would be re-awarded to someone else. Now, a grant, a crown grant, colonial grant, you get the title the day of the grant. The day the document is signed, the land is yours. And one of the largest grants that we have anywhere around has as its southern border the Rapidan River, and it is called the Northern Neck Proprietary. And in 1710, it was, according to the Privy Council, and its decision was confirmed by the king, one single person owned that grant. Thomas Fairfax, the 6th Baron of Cameron, owned 5,282,000 acres in his own name.
Oh my gosh.
And like I say, he had the title. He didn't have to seed and plant. On top of that, if you got a grant, you could receive certain, what do they call it, emoluments. You could have your own army. You could have your own court system. You could write your own laws.
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, you were king in your kingdom. Now, Fairfax gave up a bunch of that stuff to get the Privy Council to say that he was the owner. But the difference between grant and patent, for heaven's sakes, people, please get it straight. Because the terms are bandied around, and there is such a great difference between patents and grants. Sermon over.
Because abuses of land patents had become a problem, and Colonel James had a lot of land, they reduced him to 3 years to make improvements. So he broke up his 8,000 acreage into 12 separate tenant farms. And eventually he is able to deed a number of the acres of this land to specific individuals. there's a good example of this system in the museum in our agricultural wing. It is a 1733 cube house. Now, this was actually built on the behest of Alexander Spotswood. Spotswood was, of course, a royal lieutenant governor, wealthy man, owned a lot of land by hook or crook or other family member name. But he had, I think, 165 acres off of the Rapidan River. And Charles Spo built the tenant house that was required. Now, the house could not be any larger or any smaller than a cube of 16 feet. So the first and only tenant really was Argelon Price. Now, he lived in the house. His family owned the property for a long time. They actually bought it from Jonathan Spotswood's estate. That is Alexander's son. So the agreement that he had for in Spotswood with the subtenant Price was the first, I think it's 4 years he got, once the house was built, that he had to pay 1 ear of Indian corn as a token rent. Or it might have been 3 years. I don't recall. But when his lease finally became active and he had to start producing a real crop, I think it was 200 pounds of marketable tobacco in hogsheads that had to be delivered to Spotswood's agent as rent, because tobacco is king in Virginia. But we do have that house in the museum as well. And I do apologize. I should have remembered it was a patent. Thank you, Frank. Anybody else? All right. Thank you.